Let's move on to trans issues and Posey Parker.
Talking last week about Posey Parker's visit to New Zealand. This is a shot of her having been assaulted as she was trying to speak, and women weren't allowed to speak. Well, this has had many effects, political and in the press, and it's included people asking the new Prime Minister of New Zealand a very hard question. They're asking him what a woman is. Let's see how he does.
Sean. I just wanted to ask you, given comments by Keir Starmer in Britain, how do you and how does this government define a woman?
To be honest, Sean, that question's come slightly out of left field for me. Biology, sex, gender. People define themselves. People define their own genders.
Keir Starmer has said that he believes 99.9% of women do not have penises. And I know it's a strange thing for him to say, but given recent events in New Zealand, I'd ask again, how do you define what a woman is?
Well, I think as I've just indicated, I wasn't expecting that question, so it's not something that I've, pre-formulated an answer on. But in terms of gender identity, I think people define their gender identity for themselves.
So, David, that journalist's name was Sean Plunkett, and what was very interesting was that subsequent to that question, this is what happened on Twitter. If we could bring it on screen, here he is, account suspended. Not sure why his account was suspended, whether it was directly linked to that questioning or not, or to some tweets that maybe perhaps he had put out following that, but nonetheless, very interesting, bearing in mind many people getting their Twitter accounts back. But my question to you is, how come he couldn't answer that question, bearing in mind how many other politicians have already been asked that question? I find it a bit bemusing that he was unable to, or he hadn't thought about it previously.
It's not the lack of thought that's the issue, it's the lack of an answer. There's no acceptable answer, because the actual answer, adult, human, female, he can't say, because the trans lobby, the alphabet people lobby would go for him. So he can't say the truth, but actually there isn't any alternative definition, right? So he's toiling. He's having to kind of make something up. He can't, pre-formulate. He can't pre-formulate an answer because there is no formulation other than adult, human, female that makes any sense. So he's stuck.
Indeed.
Yeah, I'd just add, but of course, if we've got to this stage in the world, because it's not just happening in UK, it's happening in other countries, how can we possibly expect any other subject to be dealt with properly? Because we're now in the post-truth, post-reason, post-common sense. We're in pretty dangerous times, aren't we?
Well, the entire basis of society has been taken apart, and this was, of course, the agenda, and it's been discussed for decades before about how they're going to attack it. It's called critical theory. It's basically saying we're going to criticize the existing society in an unrelenting manner until it collapses under the weight of the criticism, and it comes from things like postmodernism. It doesn't believe there's any truth. There's only power. Right? There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no man, there's no woman, there's just power. Everything resolves down to power. And these are the ideologies that are pushing this. And I'm pretty convinced a lot of the politicians who are swayed by it actually don't understand how their thinking has been modified. But modified it has most certainly been. Because do you think if you'd asked that man 10 years ago what a woman is, he would have had any trouble?
No.
No, exactly.
No more to be said there.
Right.
Okay, let's go on.
So we've got here a couple of reports from Mail Online regarding how these issues are being handled, or shall we say mishandled, in our schools. All right, so the first one here is from a gay teacher who tried to help LGBT students feel included. He said only for them to turn on me when I failed to endorse their gender ideology. So this is Harry Winter, not his correct surname. It says, in my new role as a teacher, I didn't hide the fact I was gay. Some students began confiding in me because they were suffering homophobic bullying. Some were self-harming because of it. I believe that an LGBT club would be a way to offer them a safe space to be themselves. The mother of one of the girls who was self-harming agreed. So he set this up. And then what he found is, he said the pupils began telling me about the LGBTQIA politics. They were bombarding me with a mind-boggling array of trans terminology and that they'd picked up online. They knew everything about pride, the acronym, the ever-changing flags, the terminology. He said, what was going on? My simple attempt to make gay children feel more included and to stop the bullying had been hijacked as a hotbed for gender anxiety and trans ideology. It continues, having spoken to friends and to parents and friends, I don't think the public understands the grip gender ideology has on our school children. I was just as naive 2 years ago, but having seen the scale of the problem, I feel I have a duty to raise the alarm for the sake of those children who may be making a grave and permanent mistake. And this is, of course, the issue. The damage that is done by these ideologies to our children is profound and is life-changing and lifelong. We've got another report concerning schools from the Mail here. And this is not a teacher raising the alarm. This is a school actually endorsing the ideology that previous teacher was raising concerns about. The headline is, "Hi, your daughter is now a boy. Just letting you know." Right. So this is a casual phone call that a mother got while in a shopping centre, and about her daughter. So they write, Olivia, again name change to protect identities, was a carefree and typical little girl. This changed when she started secondary school. Suddenly life was complicated. She joined many school clubs and societies, including, at the instigation of a friend, an LGBT discussion group. In the space of a few months, she announced to her parents a series of updates. She was first a lesbian, then she was non-binary, and finally she was a boy. This was under influence from a male-identifying friend. She then began self-harming. By the time she reached 14, Olivia was in the throes of despair, threatening suicide almost daily. Without telling her parents, the school referred the schoolgirl to NHS-funded child and adolescent mental health services, but did so under a new name, meaning that not even her GP knew what was going on. The mother continues, we've now been asked to sign a safety plan which says as parents we have to create a safe space for our daughter, and we've been told we must not call her any labels which would cause her emotional distress. In summary, we have no rights to protect her daughter. She also went on to say the school called social services, because the daughter went to them and said she didn't feel safe at home because we don't accept her identity and keep saying she's a girl. So they've been given an agreement to sign. They said if we don't sign this document, the matter will be escalated to child protection. And the mother that has also been told that if the daughter attempts self-harm, they must not intervene, but instead call the police. So we're now in a situation where as parents we have no rights to protect our own daughter. Another mother said that the school told her she had no say in her 13-year-old daughter's decision to change gender because that was a child's right. So you see the child rights agenda being rolled out to justify more assaults by the state, more removal of parental rights. That's what it's all about, of course. And the children are left unprotected. Now, this next bit of video we've got here shows this is someone who's detransitioning and speaking out about her experience. This shows you just the harm that's going to be done to so many of these children by this dangerous ideology, by the exclusion of their parents from protecting them, and by the encouragement of the schools, the medical profession, and all aspects of the state that seem to have bought into this ideology uncritically.
Mentally ill teenager who had been groomed and preyed upon and sexually exploited online to the point of authorities getting involved. I spiraled into a hatred of myself and my body and was told that it was just because I was a boy born in the wrong body and that this would fix me. I was affirmed down a path where I wasn't given any other choice as to what would help me. The very first medical intervention I ever had was a double mastectomy at 16. And then a few months later, I was put on testosterone. I'm now 21, and I will live with the impacts of that so-called care for the rest of my life. In the past 4 or 5 months, I have watched as my body has fallen apart in front of me, my joints constantly hurting, my vocal cords aching, watching as parts of me atrophy away before my very eyes. And yet at 16, they looked me in the eyes and they told me this was care. They told me it would save me. Despite the fact I was never suicidal, my parents were baited with the idea of, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son? Bullied into going along with it, their biggest crime being trusting those who they thought took an oath to do no harm. It's not about hate, detransitioning. It never has been. It's about keeping kids whole. I've worked with children. I've seen them explore the world, and I've seen that magic that they have. And doing something like transitioning them takes that away. How can you look me in the eyes and tell me that a child can consent to being changed to an experimental medical industry before they're even old enough to drive or understand the impacts of what that means in the first place?
That's right. That's right.
Kids deserve to be kids. They deserve to get to explore the world as a safe and loving place.
And I mean, doesn't your heart go out to that young girl who's now, so bravely speaking out, but so many problems have been added to her, mutilation, hormone therapies and all the rest of it, when she really needed someone to take care of her, someone to talk to her, and a bit of love. It's very tragic. One of the other factors we're seeing in this is an increasing violence in the trans activist extremists, in the people really pushing this, the people who are in demonstrations. And one aspect of this has obviously been the recent shooting at a school in America. And it's pointed out, as you see in this next slide, that this is one of a number of mass shootings in the States where the perpetrator was themselves identified as either non-binary or trans. This narrative was so effective that Reuters felt the need to fact-check it. So they went to a database of mass shooting, which includes all the gangland shootings and all the rest of it, and said, well, most of the mass shootings and violent gun attacks in the US are carried out by cisgender men. So this is missing context, is what they said. So they had to respond to cover up people pointing out this series of events. Now, on a lower level of violence, I've come across one campaigner called Billboard Chris. So we see him here. So Billboard Chris has spent 2 years going around Canada and the United States, campaigning and talking and going to like pride events and all the rest of it to put forward his point of view. And you see there he's defining a dad as a human male who protects his kids from gender ideology. He has 2 daughters. And he also wears a sign that says children cannot consent to puberty blockers. Now, he's been assaulted many times. He was assaulted twice in one day in Vancouver in Canada. And we've got a few stills. I can't actually show the video because it's just expletives being shouted at him constantly. But we've got here a few stills, and you see this first one here, a person who looks like a woman, I think is actually male, from judging by later actions, and he or she is shouting obscenities at Billboard Chris. And you see in the background, ringed, a smiling police officer. This is the senior officer in charge of policing this demonstration, and she seems quite happy, right? And as you see, as the LGBT protester grabs Billboard Chris by the throat, later throwing him to the ground, the police officer's just smiling, which seems a bit strange. And this final still, so Chris has been basically grabbed by the neck, punched, thrown to the ground, and the police officer's grinning from ear to lug. And we have a lineup, all the people in the front line, they're all women, none of them are intervening. They look a bit unsure what to do. The only police officer that seems to know what to do is one rank back, and he's a man. So that raises questions about whether having women in the front line of a potentially violent conflict is actually particularly good police decision making. But this lady who's in charge, who's ringed here, it looks like glee at this man being assaulted is very worrying indeed. And it plays to the fact that the authorities have been so permeated by the same ideology that they're not doing things like uphold the law. We have also here from Billboard Chris a tweet where he made a speech at the Florida State Capitol. Now, I listened to the speech. It was very moderate. It was very paced. It was an impassioned plea to protect children from harm. And it was apparently successful because the committee passed a bill to stop childhood sex changes by 15 votes to 6. And that takes us to the Babylon Bee reporting on trans activists storming the Capitol. And again, this is going to the increasing extremism and the increasing use of force and violence. Trans activists stormed the Florida Capitol today to oppose laws that protect little kids from them rights, not the bee. So after storming the Kentucky and Tennessee capitals, they've now stormed the Capitol at Florida. About 200 activists protested against Bill HB 1069, which is an expansion of the so-called Don't Say Gay bill. The bill passed as activists were chanting and sharing their stories. So maybe Mark would like to say something about this, because I'm puzzled by this. I thought storming Capitol buildings was an insurrection and was the worst thing in the world, Mark. Is that no longer the case?
Yes, that contradiction is staring us in the face, isn't it, David? This is nevertheless pretty reassuring that they did this in Tallahassee and passed the bill at the committee level. We'll see where that goes. There's been similar things here in Texas. Critics say it's a little ineffectual, a little bit weak, but nevertheless, things seem to be pointing the same general direction here in Texas. So that's reassuring too. One thing I would add, based on what we've seen so far, is those who are in this trans community and take part in these activities, of course, they're bussed around the country. A lot of them aren't even from the communities where they're protesting. They're basically a rent-a-mob oftentimes, possibly getting NGO money, possibly through the Soros network. But one of the things they don't understand is the powers that be. When the powers that be are done with them, they'll throw them to the roadside. They'll kick them to the curb. They're just useful idiots, so they can completely take away parental rights, because that's the real goal that you mentioned earlier, David, and I'm just putting an emphasis on it. Ultimately, it's to tell parents that your children are not yours. They belong to the state, and child's rights are the way to separate the kids from the parents in loco parentis, which is in the place of the parents. That's the fundamental thing that this is ultimately all about. And I think that needs to be stressed a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Back to you, Mike.